So, the basic principle of today is to try and get an understanding of Hitler. Now, for any Year 12 historian in the room, it's going to be very, very useful to you in where you're going with your coursework. Because the coursework element where you're looking at the planned element, or how planned the Holocaust was, relies quite heavily on the understanding of Hitler as a leader and the wider Nazi state. For anyone who's not, and who's just here for interest purposes, it fills very much in with this idea of trying to actually understand someone who has been obviously appeared in various different forms of media in history that isn't always accurately portrayed. This is not, as some people thought, me denying he exists, me claiming he's a nice guy. This is just an understanding of some of the myths that have arisen around him and how they can be a bit distorting to try and understand the history of Hitler. So, I start with a standard Year 9 problem. You know, why didn't you just like one sniper? Like, go and shoot Adolf Hitler? I would have done that, me. Oh, well, just shot him and it'd be over, wouldn't it? As Year 9 boys have said to me repeatedly, they're all trained snipers, it seems. And this was actually planned. In 1944, there was an idea put forward by various different options. You could poison him, you could blow up the train, you could put a sniper in place. And they planned this out. They were going to put a sniper in Bavaria, take him through near to Berghof, where Hitler's private residence was. He went for a morning walk. They trained someone. They got a local guy who could hide some weapons, and they could have, in theory, shot him. But they don't, because they think keeping Hitler in power of Germany was far more damaging to Germany and the war than if someone had removed Hitler. They actually think, don't kill him. He's that bad a war leader. He's that bad a ruler at this point, that killing him might actually help the Germans. It would give them a martyr, and what if they get a decent general or someone in place? So the idea was abandoned, and obviously the war ended a year later. So bear that in mind as we're going through things, because I'm kind of going to get us to that point so you can understand why. What is my motivation for doing this today? As well as the coursework thing, the top one is quite important. Hitler is taught in quite a crap way, I'm afraid, for various different reasons. The time we get to teach it prior to GCSE, even the time we get to teach Hitler in the GCSE, the age groups we get to look at Hitler is often young, Year 9, Year 10, where we can't really go into this exploration of him, otherwise people would just be sat there with their tongues hanging out, wondering what we're on about. And therefore that leads to a sort of a simple narrative understanding of Hitler getting to power, a lot of urban myths. Hitler was this, Hitler didn't have this, Hitler only had one of these, Hitler's doctor was this, Hitler was saved by a British guy, with one of my least favourite, that one, during the war, the First World War. All these sort of different urban myths that are born around him. I'm not so much going to deal with those, but that's another sort of motivation for trying to get a better understanding of him. The internet really doesn't help with this either, and there's one of my pet hates is lazy comparisons of oh, he's just like Hitler, he is. And I forget the name, there's a theory into that. By the time you mention the Nazis in an argument, you've lost, because you've run out of things. There's an actual theory, named theory for this, and I forget what it is. But you scroll down YouTube comments, and guaranteed, the Nazis are going to appear within 3 or 4 comments, because people run out of arguments of where to go with this. And quite often, when people are compared to being like Hitler or like the Nazis, the comparison is totally wrong. If you to take, for example, current President of the United States of America, his policies are not like what is going on with Hitler. In fact, the only real comparison you can make is actually some of his style of how he rules things. And that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today, and trying to understand what this person was like as a leader. Okay, so I'm going to break it down to sort of 4 sort of main areas. First of all, just a little bit of a reminder of his background and getting him into power. I'm going to do that fairly quickly. Not going to linger too much on that, because the Hitler myth really develops when Hitler is in power. It has its seeds in him getting into power, but the Hitler myth really is where he's in power and actually running the country, and that's where I'll really explain what the Hitler myth is. Then we have Hitler as a wartime leader, and finally Hitler and the destruction of Germany, and why ultimately putting all your faith in this one individual and then not being able to escape from that led Germany into the best into 1945. So let's start with the background of getting him into power, and one of the areas I'll do quite quickly, because one of the main things we'll get from him getting into power is how this myth begins to be created. But at the same time, we can also point some things out which show that actually a lot of the signs of his disorganisation, a lot of the signs of what he would become are evident from the very start. So, Austria, 1889, the birth of Adolf Hitler. He's born famously in Austria. On the border, his dad is a customs officer. His mum, who's related to his dad very distantly, is a very doting mother. He has a terrible relationship with his father. His father was very much, you're going to become a civil servant, you're going to work for the Austrian state, and his mother's like, oh, don't listen to dad, it's fine, don't worry. And Alois Hitler actually dies while Hitler's fairly young, and Hitler doesn't want to go down that route. Hitler wants to be an artist, a dreamer, into his opera. He's very much against the cold, austere organisation, bureaucratic life of his father. Okay? I don't want to draw too many comparisons, and there's the truth. We have it from the start. He's against organisation, but from the very start, he goes in a very, very different path to the one that had been put out for him. Hitler at primary school. Game of Spot the Hitler, always fun. Anyone know? Any guesses?
Top.
Top where?
Middle.
Top middle, yeah. Incredibly tall child. Hitler in the middle, which is weird because if you look at photos of Stalin in the middle, Lenin in the middle, me, I was in the middle. Take for that what you will. At primary school, he's quite a good pupil. He is someone who is seen as the organisation of other boys. But when he gets to high school, nah. He's not a model student in any way, shape or form. He says the only teacher he likes is his history teacher, but other than that, they say they try to turn us into uneducated apes at school. And he leaves school without any qualifications because, again, he's going down the route of he's not going to need them because he's going to be an artist. And this is one of Hitler's. This is one of Hitler's drawings. Now, it's quite good. As people are muttering in the crowd. Yeah, he was all right at buildings. That was the problem. The art school at Vienna go, yeah, the buildings are fine, but your people, they just look wooden. And he fails to get into art school, and he lives this bohemian lifestyle in Vienna, going to the opera. His mum's giving him loads of money, and he lives and comes in and out of sources. There's lots of times we don't know what he's up to because he was just with his mate, and he dwindles away his fortune and stays in Vienna. Funny enough, at the same time that Lenin is there, Stalin's there, Sigmund Freud is there, Tito is there, they're all living within about a square mile of each other. Of course, they're all not that famous at this point, but they all live in Vienna. And Hitler basically loses his fortune and loses sort of any direction of getting a job. It's kind of important to remember he never really, other than a soldier, has a career in any sort of sense. He ends up living as a down and out. He ends up selling postcards, similar to this one, in order to make an existence. I'm not going to touch too much, by the way, just as a point on the Holocaust. It will get a mention. I know those who are doing the coursework will obviously deal with that a lot more. Where we can pinpoint Hitler's anti-Semitism, it's quite hard to do. Some want to go for as far back as Austria. He certainly would have been exposed to anti-Semitic ideals from the start, but a lot of historians don't think it's really until during the First World War that we really see, and as Germany begins to fall apart, that we really see anything more anti-Semitic than sadly existed in some of the culture already. So he flees out of Austria, actually. He flees to Munich in 1913 because he doesn't want to get drafted into the Austrian army. He's not a big fan of the Austrian Empire, too many ethnic minorities, and also he's kind of avoiding service at this point. However, he ends up in Munich in 1914, and here is a picture of, supposedly, there are some people who claim this is doctored. I tend to think that one isn't. There's a potential that one is. Here he is in Munich as war is declared in 1914. And one of the few areas Hitler actually excels in is as a common soldier. Okay? Common soldier. He's a fine private corporal, low-ranking message runner. Of course, this is where we're going to see some of the birth of the myths, he will take that as he's a prime military man. He never rises higher than sort of the second rank in the army. But years later, he will obviously think as a World War I veteran, he has the right to dictate to generals as if he's some noble leader. Second game of Spot the Hitler. Don't say the dog, even though it's got a similar tash. Over here, That is Hitler during the First World War. He is a message runner. He carries his messages for his units. He gets a medal for bravery. He survives several near misses. A shell blows up and kills nearly everyone else in his dugout apart from him. He gets gassed, and he's actually recovering from temporary blindness at the end of the First World War. He starts in the First World War to see the collapse of Germany when he goes home on leave from various injuries, and this is where we start to see Hitler, the angry man, angry at the democracy and things like that, which is bringing Germany down. Because of this, at the end of the war, and this is where we start to see Hitler as an individual we might be able to begin to recognise, he's actually one of the few who's kept in the army at the end of the war. He's actually trained by the German military when democracy has come in and when there's lots of new political parties. He's trained by the German military to speak to soldiers, to keep them right-wing, basically, to stop them going over to communist groups. He's also employed to go and spy on German new political parties, including this lot, the Deutsche Arbeiter Party, the German Workers' Party, who he actually ends up getting permission to join. He will join as member 555, except the party wanted to show they were bigger, so they always put an extra 5 on the number at the front, so he was actually member 55. There weren't many of them. And this is basically some angry men sat in a beer hall in Munich. And this is where we start to see the birth of the Hitler that we're more familiar with, because Hitler here starts to speak out and starts to get very angry and become a charismatic speaker. Now, it's a fascinating study if you just look at those first few years of his life. I am going to brush over it very, very quickly, but needless to say, at this point, it's quite unclear what he'll become. In a lot of his early writings, he talks about he was never going to be the leader. He was going to be the drummer boy for right-wing factions. He was going to be the message carrier. In fact, when he tries to take over by force, when he turns these guys into the Nazis, he actually puts himself as would have been second in the state. He was going to be in charge of the interior and the police, and other people were going to run it. So we've not got the formulated Hitler yet that we'll be dealing with for the most part of this. He takes that party, he eventually becomes its leader through some backstabbing, through some digging his heels in. The leadership of that party realise he's a good speaker and he's the reason people are coming to the beer halls to listen, and he eventually becomes its leader. We begin to see the birth of this "you need me" kind of attitude. It's not fully there yet, but it's beginning to develop. Because of that, they attempt to take over by violence in 1923. It's a complete and utter fiasco. Hardly anyone comes out to the streets. We've got a young Himmler there holding a flag, but hardly anyone comes out to the streets, and it's a complete and utter failure in terms of trying to take over the country. But what it does do is it puts him on trial. He was on trial for treason. He could have been executed in theory. As people probably know, he does a trial where he is allowed to speak. The right-wing judges are very sympathetic because they hate how Germany's become democratic. They hate all the problems with the left. And he gets supposedly 5 years, ends up serving 9 months. And this actually launches him onto the more public stage. And what we get here from his trial is the beginning of the Führerkult, the beginning of an individual who we're going to really focus on. That he starts to envision his method. It can't be taken control by complete violence. He has to come to power legitimately. I'll use it very loosely. But that he is the party and the party is formed around him. When he goes into the Nazi party, was pretty much completely and utterly smashed. It was banned for a while, its supporters flee. When he comes out of prison, there was barely anything left, but even that helps him because he basically rebuilds it around him as the central model. No longer the party that had been previously where people get in a debate and things like that. It's one big triangle with a very, very sharp upwards point with Hitler at the top of it. Of course, when he's in prison as well, he writes Mein Kampf with some other leading Nazis who are in there. Strange, the guy at the back actually was one of the few mixed, half Jewish people to be allowed in the SS. The guy at the back, he ends up actually palmed off into a part of Germany leadership. It doesn't really matter, but he was one of the very few people who was Jewish or half Jewish and in the SS. So he comes out of prison and gets to power legally. Again, inverted commas. Not just from him. There's a lot going wrong in Germany. Again, I'm doing this bit very quick to get us to the main thrust of this. But the Wall Street crash. There are political leaders leading with presidential decrees. The whole sort of structure of democracy has collapsed, even by the time Hitler is really getting the votes at this point. And of course, his using of his own private army that he's built up is something that, again, questions the legality. But between him coming out of prison and him reorganising the party, he makes it all about him. The party will be focused, and his rule within the party will be law. There can be no one else challenged for the leadership. There are a couple of people who possibly could have, but they're eventually bumped off. They're killed, actually, in the Night of the Long Knives. And with this, we're seeing what is going to form the basis of our Hitler myth. And by 1933, of course, Germany has suffered huge economic problems. Various different peoples have tried to run the place. As the poster says in German there, that Hitler is our last chance, basically. And you see this spike from May 1928, where they had 2.6% of the vote. As the Wall Street crash happens, as various other parties fail to offer a solution, people are driven to the extremes. Communists, who perhaps at one point could have been a real threat, and, of course, the Nazi Party. And with this, Hitler is given something he feels that he will use. He is given what he feels is legitimacy. Because these people, out of desperation, are turning to him, he is championed as the saviour. That's what the poster says, that's what the propaganda says. And this is going to have an effect on his psyche, because this is ultimately what he will begin to believe when he is in power. Okay? And with him achieving these things, and with him achieving these election results, and with him achieving, gaining this support from various elements of society, he's going to be in a position where, of course, he will be able to rule Germany in such a way, going beyond democracy, because they've failed. The democracies have failed, the president has failed, the chancellors have failed, coalitions have failed. And it gives him an open door in which to oppose his will. Now, as I said, I've had to run through this very, very quickly, because the main thrust of this is actually about him in power. But why do people turn to Hitler? Well, long-term bitterness. Ever since the Treaty of Versailles and the end of the First World War and all the anger that was related to that. The Constitution of Germany isn't particularly effective at blocking it. The propaganda element of Joseph Goebbels. The programme of Hitler offering, I'm going to offer you a job and I'm going to offer you bread and you're a housewife and you want this and you're a banker and you want this. It's a very effective programme. It doesn't actually make very clear promises, but it's what people want to hear. Simple slogans. Make Germany great again, kind of thing. There are attacks on other parties, both obviously verbally because of their failures and physically using his now ever-growing army of thuggish supporters. You cannot deny some of the things I've been trying to point out to you, his personal qualities, his charisma in his speaking, and his sheer unbending will that his way is right. Add all of this, of course, the economic depression and the use of a crisis, it allows him to get into power. So, what can we take from this very, very, very rapid me getting him into power? As Mr. Howard points out, half-baked racist claptrap is what is coming out of his mouth, but there was enough in there to a desperate population that they would turn to him. Fear and desperation, Hitler could be our last hope, other parties have failed, in he goes. But what is even more crucial to this next bit is that Hitler generally believes that his method is the only real method of stopping and saving Germany. If that had failed, we'd be talking about a short-lived attempted dictatorship, maybe even a communist overtaking of Germany. But because him thinking his method is the only method that will work, and it begins to work, that's going to create what we're discussing, which is the Hitler myth. So, now move into the main body of what I hope you get from this. And this is actually understanding what Hitler is like as the leader of Germany. Okay? What is he actually like in running the place? What is he actually like in his interaction with people? And what ultimately is the Hitler myth? So, when Hitler comes into power, he's got all these things he's promised. He's going to revive the nation. He's going to solve unemployment, currently, well, at 6 million at the time we first get his votes. He's going to sort out Germany's foreign affairs. He's going to bring together people into a people's community. He's going to take land from the east and settle it for Germans. There's racial purity going to come in as well. All these things that have been promised. There is some success. I'm not going to go through each policy. In each area, there are some early successes. Unemployment actually is already fallen by the time they are getting into power, but Hitler will ride that wave and take it. There will be successful rearmament that isn't challenged. He will have some early foreign policy successes. The general standard of living in Germany does start to increase. You can cover up unemployment figures further if you force people to do some labour for you and build some nice roads. There's enough success that the people think, wow, this guy's a genius. There's enough success that Hitler thinks, wow, I'm a genius. And this is the crucial sort of crux of the Hitler myth. Because within this, we get the problem of what he believes about himself and what people believe about himself. And this is where the history that I certainly believe, put forward by Sir Ian Kershaw, differs from other historians who might not want to believe this sort of approach of looking at Hitler. And Hitler believes that there is, what Kershaw believes about Hitler is that there is a personality cult that is gone into all parts of society. Not every German is absolutely blind follower of Hitler, but they follow enough or believe enough of something. He said he sought unemployment out. I don't really like the guy, but unemployment works. There are various people who still say it today. Oh, he was bad, but built the roads, didn't he? As if that is, oh well, that's fine then. Yeah, but there was enough of that went into the German population. She planned to go. It's not a protest. There was enough of that built into the German population that they're willing to stop following into more extreme measures, and it gives him the right that when he turns around to his contemporaries, sorry, I'm the one who sorted this out, believe me in what I'm suggesting. So, the Hitler myth. To take you through what exactly it is, it was put forward in 1987 by Ian Kershaw. The power position that he gets into the Third Reich is due to the image of what is portrayed about him. Whether it's true or not, that's another thing that matter. But his power is entirely from the position he has created for himself and the image he has created for himself. What it basically means is that Hitler was far removed from the truth by the end. Certainly by the end, he's miles away from this idea of what people think Hitler was. And there are plenty of times throughout his career he's far removed from what the people think they are. But Germans believe he is some kind of saviour. Germans believe he has, even if he does things wrong, he's done enough in other areas to trust them. And by the time they doubt it, it is so entrenched that they almost can't get out of it. And importantly, the second part of the Hitler myth is that Hitler believes that about himself and starts to believe in his own wild fantasies, so that when General goes, whoa, I really don't think we should take 600,000 men over this part of Russia, what do you know? I'm Hitler the saviour. I'm Hitler the man who's gone against what everyone has told me is possible. And people don't stand up to that. And that's what will ultimately lead to Germany's destruction. So, what is believed? That Hitler personified the nation? That Hitler was Germany? That Hitler had become such a powerful figure in Germany that he represented it? That he understands the German people? There's even annoyance within the German population at points at Nazis. Oh, but Hitler understands what we want. You get people who moan about their local Nazi official and think that Hitler, if he knew about what's going on down here, he'd be so annoyed because he understands what people. That Hitler alone has been able to defend them against external enemies from other countries, from internal enemies like communists. That what he's had to do has been harsh, especially in the removal of certain opposition, but is what was required for Germany, because if it had been allowed to carry on as it was in the 30s, there would have been huge problems. And that he alone is the responsible for these economic miracles and the major successes that have happened. That is what people are believing. Why? Why do they believe this? Well, because of how weak and fractured the previous system had been. In the 1920s, it had been it had been a shocking system with lots of problems, with lots of inbuilt weaknesses. So when Hitler comes along and does seem a bit better, it seems a whole world removed from what had gone previously. People should look in the mirror sometimes, and there's lots of studies about how close to a tyranny we can become. You've probably heard of things like the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison one, where people suddenly, when they're told to do something, will do something because of their sort of emotional attachment to rules and things. That helps keep this myth going. Germany had a tradition of authoritarian leaders. Democracy hadn't been around very long. Before that, we'd had Kaisers and Bismarck and a series of local kings and electors and things like that. So this perhaps fit in with more the norm of the German population than the democracy of the previous 20 years had. There are successes, there are enough successes to keep this going, especially in the 30s. Of course, propaganda helps a lot, as does the worry that if you speak out too much, there is also a terror state that will process you as well. And it's also kept in place by the Führer principle, which I'll show you in a second. So what's the impact of this? And this is, like I say, the crux of why this is important. It leads obviously to a popularity of Hitler, and that's why he stays as leader. But it covers up the failings of the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party starts making mistakes in Germany as early as it's in power. But it is covered up because of the propaganda, because of the terror, and crucially because of the belief that Hitler is doing the right thing. The popularity means that Hitler is able to lead a regime with what we'll call radical momentum that will gradually snowball into being more radical, more extreme, and this fits in with arguments about how do you end up with a Holocaust, in that once you've got someone like that in power and there's no real stops or checks on that of what he can achieve or what people around him can achieve, that ball is already rolling. Crucially, and this is what will lead to the destruction of Germany, is it means Hitler believes he's infallible, he can't do any wrong. It will mean he takes bigger gambles, it will mean there'll be more radical policies, and it will mean by the time that ultimately people realise this guy isn't what he says he is, or this guy has a lot of problems, it'll be too late because he will be so entrenched in the system. And ultimately it'll lead to the destruction of Germany. You can't understand the Hitler myth without understanding something else, which is the Führer principle. The Führer principle is basically, as the word suggests, it's the leadership principle of the Nazi Party. And it's based on the idea that everything is pointed towards Hitler. We're not going to have the need for certain cabinets and certain structures. The Reichstag will still exist and things like that, but everything is driving towards this sort of almost divine will of this one man who is going to lead Germany. His wishes will become laws. If that's something what Hitler wants to do, it's going to be happening because it is coming directly from him. There's not going to be institutional. I mean, when he comes into power, he takes the role of the Chancellor and President and just merges them together. But because of this, I'll show you in a few minutes, he doesn't really rule in the same way that other rulers will lead with councils or anything like that. It's a much more mishmash of trying to rule a country. But all because the whole Nazi Party is based that, well, this guy is the one who's gotten us into power. This is the one who's got the answers to these problems. It's all written in his book. And when he has those successes, they allow this system to exist even more because, well, he's proved it. And of course, the two go hand in hand. The myth goes with this. So, to prove this, if that is the right term, why I certainly subscribe to this view, I'm going to show you how this works on a more day-to-day basis. Decision making, for example, taken into as a theoretical kind of thing, Hitler acts as almost like an absolute monarch. He's the guy at the top, he can make the decisions, and there's no one there to stop it. The army are going to be not in a position to stop him after 37 onwards, 38 onwards. There's going to be no other organisation, and opposition has been pushed on the ground by terror. People are going to compete to implement his wishes. How do I do well in the Nazi state? A state which is run entirely from the sort of mind of one guy who doesn't really like any form of organisation. But if I go away and do my job properly, I'm going to be in favour with him. On top of that, we're actually going to see, and I'm going to show that Hitler is remarkably uninvolved in a lot of what goes on in Nazi Germany. And this is the bit where people start to go, this goes away from what people think how the Nazi Party or Nazi Germany is run. And this is where people sort of really start to go, hang on a minute, that's not what I've been taught at GCSE. You know, they had a terror state and it was run from the top, and we'll actually show you that it's quite far removed from that. And there's this idea that Kirchner put forward that Hitler provides the vision. Hitler is the visionary. Hitler is the person who will, offer the ideas, but he's not going to be the person who makes the law on it. He's not going to be the person who practically puts it in. He's not going to oversee a plan beyond maybe giving it a wave of his hand and off they go to do it. So, because of that, we need to think how this actually all works in practice. First of all, let me introduce you to Hitler, the lazy dictator. Okay? And on some of the information on those handouts, it gives you a bit more of a breakdown of this. We have a slight problem that Hitler alone is the man at the top of Nazi Germany who makes the decisions. Hitler is the person who is going to make these grand sweeping statements, but Hitler is also someone who doesn't want to get out of bed. He will stay in bed till midday. He will go to bed late at night. He likes watching American sort of second-rate movies. He likes spending a lot of time out of Berlin. He prefers spending time in the Berghof, his private villa on the border with Austria, which is a long, long way from Berlin. He doesn't work particularly hard at all. And Hitler doesn't hold cabinet meetings. He doesn't hold, right, let's all get together in the government. Everything is about access to Hitler and his will, yet his whole style will be of someone who almost governance is just something he does as part of his day-to-day routine. Because of this style, there's very little actually written down in Nazi law. He doesn't sign things. In fact, we have Hitler's signature on very few documents. And what this leads to is a problem of working towards the Führer. Working towards the Führer basically means just work it out for yourself. You know what Hitler wants. He's made a big speech. And he says, we're going to reform the German economy and there'll be jobs for all. And all the people below Hitler have to go and think, right, what does that mean for me? I'm in charge of roads, I'm in charge of the industry, I'm in charge of this. You're not going to get a set order going, right, industry, this is what I want you to do in the next few years. Or roads, you're going to get this kind of thing. There'll be some grand sweeping statement and those people have to scurry away and try and work it out. And this idea of working towards the Führer is basically, think what Hitler would want you to do. Think what Hitler would want you to do to help further the nation. And that is how Nazi Germany is run. So going down beyond the sort of the basic running of the system, there's a lot of lower level people who are guessing at what they should do, thinking about how to run things. What that actually means in practice is there's a letter received from a regional boss, a Gauleiter in Germany, and asking, I really think I should be the local leader. I'm really strong and I'm really good and I think Hitler should pick me. I'm better than this people. He doesn't get a response for weeks, and then when he gets a response back, the Führer doesn't appoint regional bosses. If you're powerful enough and you're good enough, just take power in your region and run it. The Hitler's not going to appoint the local. Why would he get bothered in the minutiae of that? And this is work towards the Führer. What would the Führer do? So this is how the system works. Now, what that means is there's very little in the way of cabinet meetings. You never get ministers together really in the same room. One of the few times that happens when ministers are together in the same room, or people of parties, is actually the Wannsee conference, and they're quite low-level ministers in terms of understanding about how the Holocaust is going to be implemented. What you get is the idea that access to Hitler becomes essential. There's a little diagram, I think it's on the second page of that little handout that's going around, that is so crucial in understanding why access to Hitler is important. Because this access is what is going to make or break you as a leader of your sector. Because Hitler is going to have a big table like this, and Hitler is going to sit in the Berghof and he's going to have a meal, largely vegetarian. And he's going to sit there, and in that meal he might discuss smoking bans in public buildings, the state of how the roads should be made into autobahns, policies towards homosexuals in the area of Bohemia, what we should do about Russia. In the hour or two you have access to him. And he's going to sit and he's going to rant and he's going to rave, and you, if you work in that area, you've got to try and work out what does he actually want for me to do. Or, alternatively, you might have a proposal you want to put to him, and you go up to him and go, look, I really think we should do this, and he'll go, amazing, amazing, off you go, and then you'll run off and try and implement that yourself. And you'll have to think about, is that what they want me to do? And that's the style. And then, of course, if you get it right, brilliant. Well done, Hitler's happy with you. And you could go away and think, I've done exactly what he wants me to, turn up and go, no, that's not what I told you to do. How dare you do that? How dare you do that? And that is the position you find yourself in, and that is how Hitler runs his government. Even more importantly, is he will give people multiple roles within an organisation, so their jobs are clearly overlapping. You have people who are responsible for areas that are totally removed from each other. You've got Hermann Goering will be in charge of sort of industry and the economic system and the Air Force, which aren't necessarily areas that go hand in hand with each other. So their roles will overlap. But at the same time, you've got Goering who will have power over some of the industry. Other people will also have roles within the industry. You've got Himmler, who's going to be in charge of the SS, but his power will start to overlap with people who have command of parts of the army. And this overlapping style means that those people are always in competition. And if they're in competition with each other, trying to impress you, the Führer, you can just sit back and let it happen. Those people are constantly trying to override each other or undermine each other for access. And it goes in peaks and troughs. Hess, for a while, is the guy. He's the guy who flies to the UK. Sorry, that was the diagram I was after. Hess, for a while, flies to the UK, but before that, he'd been deputy Führer. Goebbels, who will kill himself shortly after Hitler in the bunker, the propaganda minister, brilliant getting into power. Then he has a lull after a while, and then will actually organise things like Kristallnacht to get the Führers. Oh, look what I did! Oh, well done. You're back in favour. And this chaotic nature of ruling is what causes the Nazi state to be like it is. Now, from the outside, the GCSE version and the easy history version is this massive efficient state. If you actually peel away the layers, it's incredibly complex, and not in a good way. It's complex in everything is overlapping and everything is very confusing. I mean, this one I don't think is in there, but to get a law made, ministers have to try and get to Hitler. And the guy who controls access, Hans Lammers, can basically destroy, you've got a good idea, but I actually think you're a rival to my position, so we'll bury that. Oh no, Führer can't see it, Führer's busy. He controls access to Hitler. If you've not got access to Hitler, you ain't got power in the Third Reich. Because there's no normal meeting. You have to go and see Hitler, you have to speak to him to get your ideas in place. So this guy can crush ideas. But at the same time, people like this can actually suddenly promote ideas. Very, very famous case is a father writing, and I never get to the bottom of whether it is a horrible father or a very emotional father. Not that it really matters, but he writes a letter saying, look, I've got an incredibly sick child, incredibly ill. I really would like to be able to put him out of his misery. I'd like to use euthanasia. And one of these lackeys suddenly goes, who's going through the letters that go to Hitler from the order, that's a brilliant idea. Hitler keeps on going on about the purity of the German nation and what to do about people who are ill. I'll take him this as much, and takes him this idea that, what about these ill children? Why don't we kill them off? Why don't we get doctors to decide that? And it gets made into a policy because of one letter going to one of Hitler's sort of control of his chancelleries, and it gets formulated into policy. So it's an incredibly chaotic regime where people like this who have the power to either promote or kill proposals, and he will keep other leading ministers, oh, Hitler can't see you, sorry, he's really busy with chancellery stuff, and he will wind other people up. A couple of the other people who will have power, I mentioned Hess. Himmler, of course, is powerful because of the terror state, and the more plots he takes to Hitler and the more ideas of opposition, the more power the SS will get. Meaning the army leaders are then pushed aside. The army leaders will compete with each other. You have this guy who ends up as all sorts of different roles by the end. He's Reich Marshal, he's been head of the Reichstag, he's head of the 4-year plan of rearmament, whilst also being in charge of Prussia and the head of the Air Force. That's his portfolio of jobs. Yeah? No wonder there is a chaotic system. So we've got these various individuals who, as I mentioned, Goebbels, another one, Berman, who another one who basically has access to Hitler. Now, most of these are die-hard fanatic right-wing nut jobs. There is one that is worth pointing out to you, which is Albert Speer. And Albert Speer is a bit different, largely because at the end of the war, the Western Allies decided he may have some uses. After he'd done his time in Nuremberg, thank you very much, we'll take you, and has quite an interesting career after the end of the Second World War. He's actually Minister of Armaments and Production. He's fiercely loyal to Hitler, not as linked to as many atrocities as the other, but he will just work hard to impress Hitler. He probably keeps the war going longer than anyone else. At a time when Germany was on its knees, Speer basically keeps them with weapons. Long after it's obvious that they should have capitulated, he keeps on saying, no, we can do this offensive, I can arm those troops, in an effort to push his way to the top. Arguably, some say, because he was perhaps looking at the day when Hitler was not going to be any longer with them. So all these different people below Hitler create this chaos. These quotes are on your PowerPoint, on the handouts, but basically one of his press secretaries sums up the first line. In 12 years of the rule of Germany, Hitler produced such a confusion of government that's ever existed in a civilized state. The Hitler system was absolutely just a cauldron of people's ideas and things coming together. And crucially, he says it's intentional. This is something done to keep Hitler in that position. He can go to the people, he can still be this grand leader who is in charge of the nation, and he's not going to be challenged by anyone because they're too busy stabbing each other and trying to vie for his power. And that is how the system works. This, of course, ticks along, and it'd be interesting in a different world to see what would happen if that had become the regime forever without a major war. Arguably, it would never have got to that because Nazism is obviously very linked to military goals as well. But it was a regime that was always going to have flaws and cracks appearing at certain points. If Hitler had gone to an old man, there's an argument that, of course, he would have been even more immortalised as the guy who did all the saving, and these people below him can't run a country. Yet it was Hitler who created that system. We start to see the myths cracking in the Second World War, and these sections are much shorter than the main bit, but they do help you understand it. Before the war, Hitler had some of his greatest successes in letting all those people I just mentioned run the country. I've got us in power, I've made some decrees on how the country should be run, you guys go and do it and trip yourselves up and compete with each other to keep the nation running. He, of course, focuses on foreign policy and has a pretty standard method of doing things. Plan something absolutely out of the mind. We're going to overturn this area of Trickerside. We're going to march into the Rhineland, take it back. Tell his generals they're wrong for doubting him. Maintain secrecy. All of a sudden, go on a huge propaganda offensive, do this thing, and at the end of it, have some kind of vote, plebiscite or something, even though, of course, they're entirely rigged almost. And look at that, brilliant. Hitler has overturned the Treaty of Versailles. He's got us an army back. He's taken back this land. He's taken over parts of Czechoslovakia. Hasn't he done well? And of course, reinforces the Hitler myth. And for 33 to sort of 38, it's more successes for him. And this is even more fatal for Germany because, of course, these successes are now foreign policy successes. And he thinks, brilliant, I know foreign policy. I get how you conquer nations. This, of course, has a huge impact when he's going to go into other countries. The successes, you might think it's a bit of a weird date, 33 to 39, 40 to 41. The reason I put a bit of slash in there is, of course, when the Second World War happens, a big kind of, oh no, here we go again. And there are Germans who think, whoa, what's he done? But then, of course, the invasion successes of France and the Low Countries in 40 and the early successes in Russia give him support again. And by 41, with the German Reich at its widest extent, people think, oh, Hitler knows what he's doing in foreign policy. Even the generals begrudgingly admit, everything we said he couldn't do, maybe he's right, maybe he can do. And again, of all the times this is crucially important for Hitler, is the fact he, by 41, thinks, I know what I'm doing. His attack on Russia is ridiculous, it's a terrible idea. He goes ahead with it and he's convinced his people around him, because he's convinced them so many times before, that he is right. The problem with Hitler as a war leader is he is still lazy. He will go into a war meeting and make grand gestures about what to do, and when some poor staff officer goes, yeah, we don't have the equipment to do that, he'll be, well, go and make the equipment, and other generals who are loyal will go, yeah, shut up you. And he will ignore the minutiae. He will ignore the practicalities. It starts as big sweeping statements, I've conquered it, him, as if he'd done it. I've conquered these countries, I've conquered those countries, you will make this happen. That's how it starts, but it becomes even more fatalistic in when he will start moving armies on maps that aren't there. Famously, and without going into the breakdown of it, Stalingrad will be a huge one for this, because he will order them to hold out in this city where they had no chance of surviving, because he thinks they should hold out, and the will of the Führer. I've told you, men, that you will stand and not one step backwards, and of course that's all very well and good in a nice warm command bunker in Prussia. It's a bit different in the freezing steppes in winter in Russia. His own belief in the will to win, suddenly people start going, we've created something here. And there are enough people around him still loyal to him, but this is where people realise that this Hitler myth is a thing. That Hitler has this belief that anything is possible because he says it is. He thought he was above the cowardly generals he surrounds himself with. He thought he is above, you know, these lower people who don't understand it. Sweeping statements, sometimes like he's run the country, other times it could be the absolute minutiae and people are going, why are you trying to micromanage this specific thing? But again, he's unpredictable. He's not a particularly strong leader. He's not a particularly strong person in how he runs a country, so it falls in this. And as I said, 600,000 casualties, an entire army, and 91,000 prisoners, including 22 generals at Stalingrad, is where the tide turns against Germany. And it was a large part of his thinking that fits in with this, of him pushing them to try this. There's a couple of other points just before I sort of hit the summary of this. I said I'm not going to talk too much, well, I'm barely going to touch the Holocaust, but at the same time, the person who can run a country and become infallible and believe he's all these things will also lead other people in the very much the same sense as those people competing with each other for power. The same thing will happen in the run-up to the Holocaust. These are the various slightly lower ranked ministers who will sit at Wannsee and basically sign off the final solution. And again, they've got to that system, they've got to that ability to do that because of the sort of the will and ideas of one man and their belief in it, rather than necessarily every single person 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier, standing there and going, I know what would be a good idea in 15 years' time. No. My belief is that's not how it's come about. It's come about because Hitler has facilitated those few people who want to do it and dragged the nation along with him. So, the sort of final parts of this then. The myth is shattered to an extent at the end with Hitler and the destruction of Germany. Various things go wrong. The war in the east, 41, 42 onwards, Allies bombing in 43, Allied invasion, the civilian hardships, all these start to have people in Germany thinking, hang on a minute, our belief in this Führer might have been misplaced. But unfortunately it's too late. By 43, 44, Hitler having been in power for 10 years, the terror state being at its highest effect, there is no room for opposition. And even worse, when there actually is opposition, the famous July bomb plot, that, if anything, kind of reinforces that the end of Germany, sorry, the end of Hitler will mean the end of Germany. Because that one small glimmer of hope of removing Hitler fails, they crack down even heavier on any opposition. Meaning that there are plenty of fanatics throughout Germany, just enough who still believe in this belief of Hitler, that they will reinforce it. Several days before the end of the war, there's a German youth, 20 or so, in a small town in the west of Germany, who basically sees the Americans are coming. There's still a couple of SS and Nazi officials still there. They go, he chops some telephone lines, he rips down the Nazi insignia, and he's waiting for the Americans to come in. The local Nazi commander drags this guy into the centre of the town and hangs him. There are plenty of other German people who stood around and do nothing, and they hang him and leave the body. He escaped from the town. I think it's 3 hours later the American soldiers roll in and liberate the town. There's still that fanaticism right to the end. There's just enough of those people who still believe in this myth that they will still reinforce Hitler right until the end of the war. And there's still plenty of people who are scared because they're going right. The executions rocket up, the summary sort of rounding up of civilians carries on right until the end. But people have realised that now Hitler's fate is linked to Germany. He's so entrenched in the German system that until he goes, this war cannot end. And Hitler ain't going to go until the very last minute. Hitler, of course, at this point, still, up until the end, believes there might be some kind of hope. He's moving armies around on a map. You'll have seen the video because they use it all the time on YouTube. United have just sort of got rid of a player and it's Hitler ranting in a bunker somewhere. If you've never seen Downfall, it's actually quite a good film. But that whole rant scene is actually the moment they kind of say Hitler realises it's over and is going to shoot himself. There's no one to remove him. As Kershaw points out, there's no one there to remove him. By the end, there's no one who can actually take him out and get rid of him. There's no one who can really remove him, and so it's only ever going to be defeat that gets rid of Hitler. And all because he's created that view of him in his own country. So, to finish off then, to sort of bring this to a head, there are three views of Hitler. And again, very important if you're, for those of you doing the coursework in thinking about how this leads into the Holocaust. 3 views of of Hitler. The traditional view, which basically is what came out after the war, and what everyone believed in. That Hitler, of course he was a strong leader. How could he not have been? We just fought a war against this guy. He led a state of millions of people to do horrendous things and had armies fanatically loyal to him across the world. He was a strong leader, he was a strong dictator. He must have run that country well until ultimately they were defeated. There was the idea that, hang on a minute, Hitler was a weak leader, and I'll mention that a bit in a moment, as the more complex one I've given you. The traditional view of Hitler was that basically Hitler is law. And these guys, I'm not going to go through all of it, don't worry, but Hitler basically believes that the traditional view is that, well, it was a terrorist state, everything was towards him, you cannot escape Hitler. Hitler cannot not be a strong leader. Of course, this was written after the Second World War, people are going to believe that. A few years later, people came along and went, actually, hang on a minute, that's not true. And they focused on all those weak parts of Hitler. Hitler's laziness, Hitler's lack of commitment in certain areas, Hitler's hands-off approach. And they went down a totally different view and said, no, he's got to be a weak dictator. He doesn't take decisions. Other people run Germany. We should really be looking at the other people. Of course, straight after the war, everyone gone, I was only following orders and Hitler was a powerful leader, so I had to follow him. By this point, people are going, no, hang on a minute, we need to look at those people below him. They point to lots of different evidence of why Hitler wasn't as strong as we say it was, and some of the stuff I've pointed out. But far better for me is the idea that the more modern view. And as with everything, with history, you sort of swing from one side to the next and end up somewhere in the middle. The more modern view is this. Hitler's an activator. Hitler is the person who activates lots of different horrendous policies in Germany, whether it be Holocaust, whether it be war, whether it be various different elements that go with that. Without Hitler, you don't get Nazism, but at the same time, it is all based around this myth of someone who was a lot more efficient, a lot more a lot more controlling than he actually was. And therefore, to understand Nazi Germany, you have to understand how something like the Holocaust can happen, how they can make such horrendous decisions in war making. You have to understand him as a person. And to go back to that first point about why they left him alive, for that very reason, because of this chaotic nature he created. And if you're going to start making comparison, oh, he's like Hitler, he is, they're well like Hitler, step back and think, well, actually, are they? There are far more people who are like Hitler than we'd probably want to admit. And I don't mean they're right-wing nutters who want to go around and remove entire sections of society, but actually in the chaotic nature of running things and how they want to run businesses, countries, other organisations, of how they do things, in that they will overlap people, they will let them have far too much power in one area, not enough in others, and they will let that chaos reign. And they look, when you step back from them and see, you know, they might fire lots of people all of a sudden, or they will not have that control. So, the idea of Kershaw then is very, very important in understanding this, and I'll leave you with this. This guy was one of the last people out of Germany. He was an American journalist who left on a train to Berlin on the 6th of on the 7th of December, as America was attacked in Pearl Harbor and Germany was getting ready to declare war on them. His book is called The Last Train from Berlin. And his parting thought on what he saw in Germany was, I was convinced that of all the millions on whom the Hitler myth had fastened itself, the most carried away is Adolf Hitler himself. This man believes a lot of the things that people have said about him, and therefore it ties him into sort of a chaotic control of that country. So I hope that's helps you understand a little bit more about the more complex side of understanding what Hitler is like, rather than perhaps some of the more basic approaches of that. So, thank you very much.